Your Honor, this elderly woman clearly doesn't understand the law. The gavel crashes down as Daniel Mercer's voice cuts through the courtroom like a knife. Clara Jefferson sits motionless at the plaintiff's table, her weathered hands folded neatly in her lap. The young attorney slams his leather portfolio on the table and strides toward her, his expensive suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He snatches documents from his assistant, dramatically flourishing them in Clara's face. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think someone of your background understands the complexities of Henderson versus Fairmont. Marion turns her head slightly, giving Naomi a look both warm and deliberate. The law isn't just in books, it's in the way people treat you when they think no one's watching. She had told her that years ago, after Naomi came home from high school, in tears over a teacher who dismissed her answer without even looking at her paper. It was not advice for that day alone. It was a preparation for moments like this. The plaza in front of the Baltimore Federal Courthouse is a living mosaic this morning. Lawyers in sharp suits stride toward the revolving doors. Clerks carry armfuls of files, and a few street vendors are setting up carts along the sidewalk. The faint metallic clang of a streetcar echoes from 2 blocks away. Somewhere, someone is selling coffee that smells strong enough to stand on its own. Marion adjusts the strap of her weathered leather briefcase, a deep chestnut color, worn smooth at the edges from decades of use. She carries it not for show, but because it has carried the weight of closing arguments, dissents, and rulings across her entire career. Naomi glances at it as if drawing confidence from the object itself. A sleek, black sedan pulls up to the curb, the kind that looks like it should have a driver in a cap. Instead, the rear door swings open and Victor Langford steps out, his charcoal suit immaculate, tie knotted in a perfect Windsor. His shoes catch the light with every step, polished to a mirror shine. He doesn't look at Marion as he comes around the car. His eyes are already scanning the plaza for someone else. "Morning," he says brightly, to Naomi. He extends a hand toward her but keeps his body angled away from Marion, as if she were simply part of the scenery. "Victor Langford, Hawthorne Redevelopment." Naomi accepts the handshake with professional firmness. "Naomi Holt, Eastgate Cultural Center." She turns slightly to include Marion. "And this is—" "Of course," Victor says, cutting her off with the ease of a man used to controlling conversations. "Your grandmother. I hear this is your first major case. Quite the ambitious start." The words are smooth, but the tone is dipped in condescension. Marion lets them pass as if she has not noticed. She has learned that people like Victor measure themselves by how quickly they can put others on the defensive. Silence unsettles them more than argument. Arthur Winslow, senior partner of Victor's firm, emerges from the front of the sedan. He adjusts his glasses and nods at Victor, but Victor doesn't acknowledge him. Arthur's expression is unreadable, but Marion notices the slight pause before he follows his attorney toward the courthouse doors. Inside the pre-trial conference room, the air is cooler and smells faintly of paper and polish. The long table is already half covered with stacks of legal binders, most of them embossed with Hawthorne's logo. Victor slides into a chair across from Naomi and Marion, flipping open a binder with a flourish. "You know," he says to no one in particular, "cases like this usually wrap up quickly. Progress has to move forward after all." Naomi draws in a breath, but Marion lays a hand lightly on her granddaughter's wrist under the table. She does not look at her, but Naomi feels the message. Not yet. The door opens again, and a woman in a dark suit enters, a leather folio tucked under her arm. The deputy clerk for Judge Celeste Rowland. She moves briskly around the table, distributing case files. When she reaches Marion, she pauses, her eyes brightening in recognition. "Good morning, Miss Holt," she says warmly. "Good to see you again." Victor glances up at that, but Marion only inclines her head in return. Moments later, they are ushered into courtroom 4B. The ceilings are high, the wood paneling deep and polished, the flag to the left of the bench slightly stirring from the air vents. Marion takes her seat where she can see both the jury box and the counsel tables without turning her head. Naomi sits beside her, flipping to her opening statement. Victor is already standing, greeting the court reporter with a familiarity that borders on performance. He keeps his voice pitched just loud enough for the jury to hear as he jokes with a colleague about quick and easy cases. One of Hawthorne's executives leans in to whisper something to him, and they both smile. Judge Rowland enters, and the bailiff calls the court to order. Victor steps forward for his opening statement. His voice fills the room, his cadence polished, his body language expansive. He speaks of economic opportunity, of blighted structures, of inefficient land use. The Eastgate Cultural Center, in his framing, is an obstacle to the city's future. Naomi rises for her turn. Her tone is steady, but Marion can see the tension in her shoulders. She talks about Eastgate's history, its role as a hub for small Black-owned businesses, its place in the community's story. Victor interrupts twice with objections, thin ones, meant to break her rhythm. Judge Rowland overrules both, but the interruptions do their work. Marion's gaze drifts toward the jury. She notices one man in the front row leaning forward slightly when Naomi mentions Eastgate's first bank. Another juror, a woman with silver hair, nods faintly. The connection is there, but fragile. When Victor sits down, he leans toward his client and says something that makes them both chuckle. Naomi glances at Marion, a flash of frustration in her eyes. It is then that Victor, perhaps emboldened by the sound of his own voice, says within earshot of half the courtroom, "This will be over before lunch." Marion lets the silence stretch for a beat, then turns to Naomi with a faint smile. "Then we'd better make him miss dinner." Victor's voice booms across the wood-paneled courtroom as if he's addressing a lecture hall, not a judge bound by decorum. The timbre is deliberately resonant, calculated to bounce off the high ceilings and settle in the ears of the jury, like a lecture from a man certain of his own mastery. Marion sits back in her chair, her cane resting lightly against her leg, and watches him the way a chess master watches an opponent open with the same predictable moves she has countered for decades. She remembers, unbidden, a moment from her first year on the bench, when a young attorney tried to intimidate her by reciting a string of legal citations so fast he clearly hadn't grasped their meaning. She had let him finish, then asked a single question that unraveled his argument entirely. The memory makes the corner of her mouth twitch, not in amusement, but in recognition of the pattern repeating itself here. This morning, the chapter of their confrontation is about momentum. The case has officially begun, and Victor means to set the tone. He's already laid out Hawthorne Redevelopment's vision in lofty terms. Revitalization, economic expansion, a brighter future for Baltimore. He paces deliberately, clasping his hands behind his back one moment, slicing the air with them the next. The words are dressed in the language of progress, but Marion hears what lies beneath. Dismissal of history, impatience with anything that does not turn an immediate profit. Naomi stands for her own opening, her hands steady on her notes, but her eyes betraying the extra beat she takes to steady herself. She speaks clearly, drawing a picture of the Eastgate Cultural Center, not as a relic, but as a living space that has grown with the community for decades. She paints it in the colors of history, business, and culture intertwined. But each time her argument gains rhythm, Victor interrupts. "Objection," he says, rising smoothly, his voice heavy with patronizing civility. The first time, Judge Rowland overrules him, her tone mild. The second time, she does the same, though her eyes sharpen slightly as they meet his. By the third interruption, Naomi's shoulders are just a fraction tighter, her breath drawn a touch quicker before she continues. Marian notices the signs and slips her a small folded note, sliding it across without breaking her gaze from Victor. Naomi unfolds it with her thumb and forefinger under the table. Ask him why Hawthorne filed under Section 47B instead of the standard process. When Naomi poses the question to the city planning officer on the stand, the man blinks. "I'd have to check with our legal team about the specific filing," he admits. The hesitation is small, but the jury notices. Marian sees them exchange glances. Victor tilts his head toward his table with a smirk, as though he's allowing a child to score a minor point. The smirk deepens when his phone vibrates on the table, and he silences it without looking, so sure he has time to waste. Marian's gaze, however, catches Naomi's phone buzzing quietly in her bag. She pulls it out just far enough to read a message from Samuel Drake. "Package en route." Naomi doesn't fully understand, but Marian's faint nod tells her it's important. Victor's next witness, an urban development analyst, rattles off figures and projections with rehearsed confidence. Jobs created, tax revenue generated, community benefits listed as bullet points in verbal form. On paper, it sounds compelling. In reality, Marian can already feel the small gaps between each assertion, the space where details live that Victor has chosen not to illuminate. Naomi takes the cross-examination, pushing on the time frame for these benefits, whether similar developments have delivered as promised. She scores some points, but Victor interrupts again. "Objection. Counsel is mischaracterizing my witness's expertise." Judge Rowland overrules with a sharper edge this time. "Mr. Langford, allow Ms. Holt to finish." Still, the pattern of interruption works its way under Naomi's skin, and Marian sees her start to rush. When Naomi sits, she keeps her eyes fixed on her notes, her jaw set. Victor leans toward the jury, and with a casual glance at Marian says, "Some folks can't keep up with how the law works these days." The line hangs in the air, equal parts arrogance and insult. The jury's eyes flicker between them. Marian does not blink. She leans just slightly toward Naomi, her voice low and steady. "Let him keep talking. He's laying his own trap." The rest of the morning unfolds in deliberate motions. Marian speaks rarely, content to observe Victor's rhythm. Every exaggerated objection, every indulgent smile, every time he explains a legal point to the jury as though no one else in the room could possibly grasp it, she is cataloging them all. She is not only watching him argue, she is watching him build the very tower she intends to dismantle. By the time Judge Rowland calls a short recess, the air in the courtroom feels denser, charged with something just beneath the surface. Naomi exhales hard as they gather their files. "He's playing games with the jury," she mutters. "Every move he makes," Marian says, rising with deliberate grace, "is a piece on the board. We just have to decide when to take the king." They walk out together, passing Victor, who is already half turned toward one of Hawthorne's executives, laughing about something that seems to amuse them both. Marian doesn't slow, but she hears it. The echo of his voice carrying down the marble hall, the confidence of a man certain the game is already his. She knows better. She glances at Naomi as they step into the hallway's cooler air. "Let him keep talking. He's laying his own trap." The sealed envelope slides across the defense table, and Victor's smirk falters for the first time. It is a quiet movement, almost nothing, a rectangle of heavy paper kissing the varnished wood with the softest whisper. But even a whisper can curdle the air when a man believes the afternoon belongs to him. He pauses with his Mont Blanc pen lifted like a baton, frozen mid-gesture, eyes tracking the courier's retreat before he remembers to resume the performance for his clients. The moment is small enough to miss. Marion does not miss it. At midday, the courthouse cafeteria hums with the familiar clatter of trays and the faint, comforting scent of overbrewed coffee. A local jazz station murmurs from a tinny ceiling speaker, the saxophone line wandering like a street in rain. Lawyers in dark suits perch on plastic chairs and talk too loudly into their phones. Clerks in short sleeves lean over steaming bowls of soup. It is the ordinary America of a weekday noon. Hurried, hungry, preoccupied. Marion and Naomi sit at a small table by the window where a square of weak winter sun warms Marion's knuckles. Naomi unwraps a turkey sandwich and immediately forgets it exists. "He attacks the rhythm," Naomi says, still keyed up from the morning. Every time the argument starts to connect, he throws an objection like a rock through the window. It is not even about the merits, it is about control. "Control is the veneer," Marion says, unscrewing the cap of her old fountain pen. The barrel is black with a faint marbling only noticeable if you loved it for a long time. It was given to her by a civil rights lawyer in the late 1970s after a trial that went on for 10 days and changed the hiring practices of an entire county. She smooths open her small notebook, the paper cream-colored and faintly toothy, a pleasure under the pen. Underneath the veneer is hurry. Underneath hurry is fear. Naomi looks toward the door, where Victor's entourage had swept past a minute ago, loud with laughter and the clink of ice in paper cups. He does not sound afraid. He sounds like a man who has learned that velocity can substitute for weight in rooms where no one asks him to slow down. Marion draws a small square on the paper and writes a number in it, then another. There are numbers in his expert's testimony that do not belong together. The jobs projection? The tax model, Marion answers softly. He presented a forecast that treats a mixed-use development like a purely commercial property. The third term is wrong. If the third term is wrong, the revenue output pretends the city earns more than it can. The overstatement is not everything, but it could be enough to make honest men hesitate. Naomi leans in, lowering her voice as if the equations themselves were listening. "You heard that in real time?" "You heard it too," Marion says, without looking up. "You were simply busy being interrupted. He did you a favor by requiring you to fight for breath. You stayed present. You did not drown in the sound he made." Naomi breathes out, shoulders losing a fraction of their stiffness. "I wanted to ask for sanctions for his snide comment to the jury." "You wanted satisfaction," Marion says gently. "But we did not come here for satisfaction. We came for justice. Satisfaction is sugar. Justice is bread." Naomi laughs despite herself, then sobers when Marion turns the notebook around and taps the equation she has sketched from memory. "Ask the witness to write this. There, on the board. Not the whole analysis, just this spine of the calculation. When he writes it, he will reveal where he lives." Naomi nods, studying the symbol Marion circles. "And what if he recovers and pivots to a different multiplier?" "Then he recovers," Marion says. "We do not need him to fail. We only need the truth to stand up on its own 2 feet." A courier in a navy windbreaker appears at the cafeteria doorway, scanning the tables. He spots Marion and lifts a hand. She caps the fountain pen and rises with the care of a woman who knows her balance is a resource to be spent deliberately, not squandered. The man waits by the railing, respectful, the sealed envelope tucked under his arm like a deliverance. "For Miss Holt," he says. "By request." "Thank you." Marion accepts the envelope, its weight promising more than paper. The seal bears the letterhead of an archive, where a friend has kept her name in the ledger longer than most people keep their own resolutions. She has not told Naomi everything, because preparation is not theater. She tucks the envelope vertically into her briefcase and smooths the leather flap closed with a thumb that remembers 1,000 court days. As they walk back through the corridor, the hallway's marble amplifies the steady tap of Marion's cane. A bronze plaque catches Naomi's eye, listing landmark cases decided in the state, dates etched in serif letters. She slows. "You never wanted your name on one of these." "It is there anyway," Marion says, not without humor. "But I never wanted the conversation to stop with a plaque." They re-enter courtroom 4B, where the air is cooler, the lights a little too bright, the hush a living thing. The jury files in with the small, ritual movements ordinary people make when tasked with something both heavy and abstract. Judge Rowland has not yet returned to the bench. The court reporter adjusts her machine and flexes her fingers. Victor has regrouped into performance posture. He confers with the urban development analyst, a man in his late 40s with the wary eyes of someone who has learned to accept a paycheck from people who use him as a shield. Hawthorne executives settle in the first row, like a row of tailored crows. Near the back, Arthur Winslow sits alone, chin tucked, studying the geometry of catastrophe. Naomi's phone buzzes in her bag again. She slides it open under the table. A message from Samuel Drake, original notes and transcript copies included, tabbed where you asked. She passes the screen to Marion, who reads it with the barest acknowledgement. Marion is not a woman who smiles at her own foresight. She simply recalibrates. The defense calls their economic analyst back for clarification, a tactical mistake born of pride. Victor believes the morning's momentum was his, and men in love with momentum cannot resist one more push. He starts soft, asking the analyst to restate credentials: the doctoral degree, the journal publications, the consulting history with several metropolitan projects that, in brochures at least, made neighborhoods bloom like time-lapse flowers. "Doctor," Victor says, pacing 2 steps right, 2 steps left. "For the benefit of the jury, would you explain how you projected the tax revenue for the proposed mixed-use development?" The analyst leans forward, grateful to return to his comfort, and produces a confident paragraph about inputs and assumptions. He says the word "standard" several times, a talisman against specificity. "Thank you," Victor says, turning with a smile he keeps ready for juries on Tuesdays. "No further questions at this time?" Naomi rises with a controlled breath. "Your Honor," she says, "may the witness approach the easel?" Judge Rowland gestures. "Proceed." Naomi looks at the analyst and asks for the core of the calculation. "Would you write, please, the formula you used to convert projected activity into anticipated tax revenue, focusing on the third term?" He glances at Victor, as if for permission, then stands and takes the marker. The cap makes a small pop, and then the squeak of ink on laminated paper slices the quiet. He writes neat letters and Greek symbols in a tidy line, each element placed like a brick in a wall he has built before. "Thank you," Naomi says. "And the third term, can you label that component for the jury?" "The commercial property factor," he says, tapping the part of the expression with the back of the marker. Naomi nods. "For a mixed-use development, with residential units above ground-floor retail and public space as described in the Hawthorne plan, is the commercial property factor the correct term for the third position?" He hesitates. "In the standard approach, yes." Marion folds her hands, fingers steepled but relaxed, an old habit from the bench. She watches the jurors lean forward, just a little, like people at a window where something wordless is happening on the street below. Naomi does not raise her voice. "Is there a residential adjustment factor in the Grayson model for mixed-use projects? And if so, where would it appear?" The analyst swallows. "There is such an adjustment." "And if the residential adjustment factor belongs in the third term for mixed use, Would a commercial-only factor overstate the revenue projection for a plan like Hawthorne's by a non-trivial margin? The marker trembles in his hand. Potentially, he says. Depending on other... By approximately what margin? Naomi asks, laying her finger on the formula as if she were marking a place in a book she loves. He looks down, calculates without paper, because he knows this answer the way a man knows the weight of his own briefcase. Around 24%, he says finally, softly enough that the room must lean in to catch it. A hush settles, not theatrical but practical, the hush of arithmetic becoming ethics before everyone's eyes. Victor is on his feet. Objection. This is an unfair extrapolation. Overruled, Judge Rowland says, the word landing like the first raindrop before a necessary storm. The witness may answer. Naomi thanks the analyst, her politeness neither barbed nor soft. So the city's projected benefit has been presented as greater than it is, for the record. The analyst nods once, regret hastening his honesty. He caps the marker with both hands, as if returning a lid to a jar of something that has been in the sun too long. Victor tries to redirect. He slides his pen across the table, reclaiming his baritone. He asks about job multipliers, secondary effects, the so-called lift of anchor tenants, the inevitable glow that follows new glass facades. He wants the jury to remember promise, not math. He is good at this. For a minute, he almost makes the room forget the board. Marion allows the attempt its minute. Allowing a man to display his craft before you take it apart is a courtesy and a lesson. When Naomi sits, Marion reaches for her notebook. Now is the time, she says, her voice too low to travel farther than her granddaughter's ear. The bailiff opens the side door, and a thin beam of hallway light cuts across the floor. A courier enters with a controlled urgency, the sealed envelope riding his open palm like something holy and dangerous. He crosses to the clerk's desk, confirms a name, and then, at Marion's small nod, brings it to her table. The paper is thick, the seal unbroken. The letterhead at the corner wears the name of an institution that keeps silence professionally. Marion slides a finger under the flap and lifts it only far enough to draw out the first document. The paper smells faintly of old glue and cool stacks, a scent lawyers either love or despise because it means someone did a real job before you were born. Inside are transcript pages with marginalia in a hand Naomi has seen in newspaper reproductions and casebooks. Samuel Drake's tabs marking the arguments Marion once composed when she wore a different robe. Footnotes that do not embellish so much as stitch. The original notes from a hearing that became the spine of a preservation ruling invoked badly by men who learned it from a digest summary. Naomi stares, and for a breath her awe is not about power, but about stewardship. The law is not a weapon here. It is a memory carefully kept. Counsel, Judge Rowland says from the doorway, returning to the bench with her robe flowing behind her like a plain, dignified flag. Are we prepared to continue? Yes, Your Honor, Victor says quickly, too quickly, needing to be first. One moment, Your Honor, Marion replies, rising with the slow grace of a woman who doesn't need the room to wait, but expects it to anyway. She doesn't yet declare anything. She doesn't need to. She slides the envelope flat on the table and rests her palm on it, the way a pastor rests a hand on a book that will outlast him. Victor keeps looking at the envelope, as if it contains a ticking sound only he hears. He tries a smile at the jury and remembers, a fraction of a second too late, that their eyes have shifted toward the plaintiff's table, as if compelled by gravity. Arthur Winslow, from the gallery, adjusts his tie and leans forward in his seat. He has been a lawyer long enough to know the difference between theater and a hinge. Something has turned. and he knows it because Victor is no longer pacing. Victor is standing still. Naomi's hands are steady now. Her voice, when she addresses the court, carries the even warmth she uses with first-year associates who doubt themselves. Your Honor, we will have questions on redirect regarding Hawthorne's filing under Section 47B and the timing of their community impact efforts. In addition, we intend to introduce materials authenticating the scope and intent of the precedent cited by the defense. Victor opens his mouth to object and closes it again. The envelope holds him like a hand at the back of his neck. He reaches for his water and almost knocks the glass. The Montblanc pen, placed as a prop all morning, rolls an inch toward the edge of the table and stops as if embarrassed for him. Judge Rowland studies Marion. "You may proceed when ready," she says, voice neutral, eyes not. Marion does not rush. She pulls 2 pages free and slides them to Naomi, whose expression changes from alert to luminous. The margin notes are not merely clarifications of language. They are the architecture of what words are supposed to do. A sentence in careful ink pins down a point that Victor has been strafing with speed. A bracketed citation hammers a bridge between 2 ideas that his expert pretended did not touch. Across the aisle, a Hawthorne executive shifts in his chair and glances toward the door as if calculating whether a phone call could save them from the afternoon. Another executive stares straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands folded in the precise corporate posture taught by men who fear photographs. Naomi rises. On redirect, she asks the analyst about the timing of the company's community assessment. Was any survey or listening session conducted prior to the application under Section 47B? He shakes his head once. No. Was any attempt made to consult the small businesses currently operating in the Eastgate Cultural Center about displacement impact before the filing? No. Thank you, Naomi says, then turns to the easel where the formula dries in glossy ink. And just to confirm for the jury, correcting the 3rd term to the residential adjustment factor yields a tax revenue projection lower by approximately 24% than the figure presented this morning. Yes, he says, almost relieved that the number has a home now and no longer floats in his throat. Victor objects again, but even his objections have lost their luster. Judge Rowland allows the record to reflect the correction. The court reporter's fingers flicker like a pianist who has played this piece for years, but never tires of the melody of clarity. A murmur rustles through the gallery and subsides at a single look from the bailiff. Arthur rubs his forehead and exhales through his nose. Victor pivots to argue that even with conservative adjustments, the development's benefits outweigh any sentimental value attached to Eastgate. The word sentimental wilts and dies between his teeth. Words know when they are misused. Naomi sits. Marion lowers herself into her chair, as if taking a place at a long table in a familiar house. She lets the room breathe. She lets Victor attempt to bend the moment back. She knows that real turns are never loud while they are happening. They only sound loud in the retelling. The afternoon light has shifted by the time the clerk arranges a new stack of exhibits. A gold slit of sun angles through the high window and lays itself across the seal carved above the bench, warm for a few private seconds before moving on. The courthouse carries these small benedictions without comment. Marion closes the flap of her briefcase and rests her hand on the leather like a farewell to a companion who has walked through wars without complaint. She leans to Naomi and speaks only to her. The words even and light, the way a person speaks when what she is saying is both promise and plan. This is where the tide turns. Mr. Langford, Marion says evenly, there is no Turner amendment to Baker v. Westfield, and I know that because I wrote the opinion. The words hang in the courtroom like the toll of a bell no one was expecting, low and resonant, impossible to ignore. Naomi feels the air shift against her skin, the hush rippling from the jury box to the gallery. Somewhere in the back, a chair leg scrapes faintly against the floor, the only sound in a room that has gone utterly still. Naomi had heard her grandmother warn in the past. The law isn't just in books. It's in the way people treat you when they think no one's watching. She realizes now this is the moment that warning was pointing toward. Victor has been watching all day, but not truly seeing. Victor Langford's mouth opens, closes, then opens again. The pen in his hand becomes a prop he no longer remembers how to use. He begins, but Judge Rowland raises a hand. Let's hear her out, Mr. Langford. Marian rises from her chair with a grace that denies her years, leaning lightly on her cane but commanding the room with nothing more than the steadiness of her presence. She walks to the lectern, places her notebook beside her, and looks directly at the judge. Your Honor, I served on the Maryland State Supreme Court for 12 years. Before that, I practiced law for over 3 decades. In my time on the bench, I authored the majority opinion in Baker v. Westfield, the very case Mr. Langford has cited repeatedly and, I must say, mischaracterized. She gestures toward the clerk, who brings forward a stack of documents from the envelope she had received earlier. The pages are bound neatly, the seal of the court embossed on the covers. These are the original case transcripts, along with my handwritten notes from deliberations. There is, and never has been, any Turner amendment to that ruling. The supposed amendment Mr. Langford referenced is a fabrication. The jurors lean forward, brows knitting as they glance toward Victor. In the gallery, Arthur Winslow slowly removes his glasses, polishing them with the precision of a man buying time to think. Victor recovers enough to say, Your Honor, I was under the impression— That, Marian cuts in, her voice firm but never raised, is precisely the problem, Mr. Langford. Impressions are not facts, and in the practice of law, truth is not optional. Judge Rowland's expression is unreadable, but the faint tightening at the corners of her eyes suggests approval. Proceed, Justice Holt. Marian turns to the jury. This case is not about nostalgia. It is not about sentimentality. It is about whether the law can be bent to erase a community's history when that history happens to stand in the way of profit. The precedent in Baker v. Westfield was clear. A property's cultural significance, documented and supported, can outweigh economic projections, especially when those projections are inflated or manipulated. That was the law when I wrote it, and it is the law today. Her voice carries no theatrics, but every syllable lands with deliberate weight. She returns to her seat, the quiet tap of her cane marking each step. Victor swallows, adjusts his tie, and turns to the jury as if he might still salvage his footing. Had I known— That's precisely the point, Mr. Langford, Marian says gently, before he can build a sentence. You didn't know because you didn't look. You saw an elderly woman at this table and assumed she could be pushed aside. You didn't research who you were facing, and you didn't think you needed to. That tells us all something about the way you approach this court and the people in it. The gallery stirs, whispers rising and falling like a tide, until the bailiff's glance stills them. Arthur Winslow leans forward from his seat in the gallery and catches Victor's eye. His lips move just enough for Victor to see the words, "Stop talking." Judge Rowland clears her throat. Justice Holt, may I ask why you withheld your credentials until now? I wanted the case to stand on its merits, Marian replies. I wanted the arguments to be weighed without the distortion of my reputation. But after repeated misstatements of the law, misstatements that I am uniquely positioned to correct, it became my responsibility to clarify the record. A faint flush creeps into Victor's cheeks. Justice Holt, I sincerely apologize for— Apologies are unnecessary here, Marian says, her gaze steady. What matters is that every person who enters this courtroom, regardless of age, race, or background, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. You owe that to the law, not to me personally. Arthur rises and walks down the aisle to the defense table, his steps measured, his expression carved in stone. He bends toward Victor, his voice low but sharp enough that a few in the front row catch the tone, if not the words. We're going to need to clean up the mess you just made, starting now. Victor doesn't look at him. His eyes are fixed on the neat stack of documents Marion left on the evidence table, as though the paper itself has shifted the ground under his feet. Marion sits back, folding her hands loosely in her lap. She knows the real work is far from over, but the balance in the room has changed. The jury sees it. The judge sees it. And Victor, for all his denial, feels it. Arthur straightens and speaks aloud for the court to hear. Your Honor, the defense would like to request a brief recess to confer with our client. Judge Rowland glances at Marion, then back to Arthur. 10 minutes. As the gavel comes down, Naomi leans close to her grandmother. I think he finally believes you're not going to vanish. Marion allows herself the smallest of smiles. He believes something, she says. Arthur places a firm hand on Victor's shoulder. Outside. Now. Victor glances back once, his gaze moving from Marion to the jury, and then to the documents. Whatever he thought this case was when the morning began, it's no longer that. He's in a different game now, and Marion Holt is playing on a board he never even noticed. Arthur's voice is a low growl as they leave the courtroom together. We're going to need to clean up the mess you just made, starting now. Naomi slides a chart across the table, the lines and columns damning enough to make Hawthorne's executives go still. The rustle of the oversized paper is loud in the courtroom's quiet, like a flag unfurling before a charge. Marion watches their eyes track the columns, the recognition sparking behind their careful faces. This is not the first document they have seen in this trial, but it is the first one that makes them shift in their chairs. Earlier in the week, Samuel Drake had promised her, when you look at all the pieces together, the pattern will tell its own story. She had taken him at his word, and now Naomi was unrolling that pattern like a map no one on the defense side wanted the jury to see. The Baltimore afternoon light comes in angled through the high windows of courtroom 4B, tinting the air with a muted gold that makes the paper's edges glow. The fluorescent hum overhead is the only sound until Judge Rowland clears her throat and says, "Proceed, Ms. Holt." Naomi straightens, her voice steadier now than at any point since this trial began. The document before you is a consolidated record of Hawthorne Redevelopment's property acquisitions over the past 5 years within Baltimore city limits. The data includes sale prices, assessed market values, and ownership demographics at the time of purchase. She turns to the jury with a calm, deliberate gaze. When viewed individually, these transactions appear ordinary, but viewed together, a pattern emerges. The first slide appears on the monitor, bars of blue and red, the difference between what Hawthorne paid for black-owned properties versus those in predominantly white neighborhoods. The disparity is stark, the red bars, representing underpayment, towering over the blue. Marion watches Victor's jaw tighten. He knows numbers can be more damning than words, especially when they're simple enough for anyone to understand. He shifts his gaze to Arthur Winslow, who has moved closer to the defense table now, his brow furrowed. Naomi continues, "These purchases were made through 7 separate shell companies, different names, different registered agents, but all linked back to Hawthorne Redevelopment through shared executives, overlapping funding sources, and identical closing attorneys." She clicks to the next slide, where lines connect addresses like a spider's web, converging on the Hawthorne corporate headquarters. Arthur rises. Your Honor, may we approach? Judge Rowland glances at Marion, then nods. At the bench, Arthur lowers his voice. We'd like to withdraw our redevelopment application for the Eastgate Cultural Center property. Marion meets his gaze without flinching. That's no longer sufficient. What you see in that chart doesn't stop at Eastgate. This is a systemic practice, and it requires a systemic remedy. Arthur's jaw works for a moment before he says, "What exactly are you demanding?" "An independent audit of all Hawthorne's development practices for the past decade," Marion replies. "Creation of a community advisory board with binding authority over future projects in historically marginalized neighborhoods, and a commitment to fund apprenticeship programs for minority contractors. You built your company by taking from these communities. It's time to invest in them." Arthur leans back slightly, calculating. "You're not leaving me much room to maneuver. You left yourself no room when you allowed this pattern to become your business model." Judge Rowland calls the recess. The jurors are escorted out, the gallery murmuring as Hawthorne's executives huddle in the far corner of the room. Victor is no longer in the center of the circle. Arthur is. The younger lawyer stands at the edge, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if watching his own shadow shrink. Naomi returns to Marion's side. "Do you think they'll agree?" "They will," Marion says, "because the alternative is a public trial about every one of those properties, and they know what that will cost them." 2 days later, when court reconvenes, Arthur stands with a formal statement. "Your Honor, Hawthorne Redevelopment requests a 48-hour recess to explore comprehensive settlement options with opposing counsel." From the bench, Judge Rowland nods. "Granted." As the courtroom empties, Marion leans toward Naomi. "By the end of this, it won't just be Eastgate we save. It will be every place like it in this city." 6 months after losing the case, Victor Langford steps into the Eastgate Cultural Center not as an attorney, but as a volunteer. The winter air clings to his coat as he crosses the threshold, the warmth inside carrying the mingled scents of fresh paint and brewed coffee. The renovation is complete now. Arched windows restored, the lobby's wood trim polished to a soft sheen, community bulletin boards already crowded with flyers for literacy classes, art shows, and small business workshops. Months earlier, Marion had told Naomi in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, "Justice isn't just in the verdict, it's in what you build after." That promise hangs in the air now, woven into the hum of voices and the laughter of children racing down the side corridor toward the computer lab. The State Bar Association's hearing had been 3 months after the trial ended. Marion sat at the witness table, poised as always, while the committee heard testimony about Victor's conduct, deliberate misrepresentation of precedent, personal remarks implying incompetence based on age, and the fabrication of a Turner Amendment that never existed. Victor's own attorney, a man with more silver than black in his hair, had tried to spin it as a series of misunderstandings. Halfway through his prepared remarks, Victor had stopped him and spoken directly to the committee. He admitted that when he first saw Marion in that courtroom, he had assumed she was legally unsophisticated, someone he could push aside without research or caution. He'd called it the most shameful assumption of his career. The committee voted for a 6-month suspension, 200 hours of ethics training, and 400 hours of community service at Eastgate. Now he's here for the first of those hours. Naomi spots him from across the lobby and walks over, her posture still carrying the steel of the trial days. "Mr. Langford," she greets, not coldly but without pretense. "Naomi," he answers, meeting her gaze. "I'm here for the computer literacy program. Ms. Holt said you'd point me toward the coordinator." She studies him for a moment before nodding toward a classroom down the hall. "That way. And it's Ms. Holt to you, too. The program's coordinator, a wiry man named Curtis who grew up in East Baltimore, shakes Victor's hand and sets him to work explaining basic legal research tools to high school students. Victor rolls up his sleeves, aware of the irony. Teaching the same fundamentals he once used as weapons in court, now offering them as tools for empowerment. Across the hall, Marion is in the community library, listening as a small business owner explains a new co-op plan. She hears the muffled laughter from the classroom and glances through the glass panel in the door. Victor is leaning over a student's shoulder, pointing to a public records search on the screen. The easy grin on his face is nothing like the tight, calculated smile he wore in court. The Eastgate reopening had been an event in itself. Judge Rowland attended, speaking briefly about the importance of preserving spaces that carry a city's history. The $500,000 from the settlement had gone not only to repairs, but to new programs, equipment, and a rooftop garden with a view of the skyline. Marion had walked through each floor that day, her cane tapping softly against the new hardwood, noting the blend of old and new, the original light fixtures cleaned and restored, the modern kitchen in the community cafe gleaming under bright pendant lamps. Weeks into his service, Victor began arriving early, staying after his hours were logged, helping with whatever was needed, fixing a jammed copier, hauling boxes of donated books, even running flyers to nearby churches and schools. Marion noticed, but said nothing. One cold Thursday afternoon, he approached her in the main hall, a formal envelope in hand. "I have something for you," he said. Inside was a letter requesting her mentorship. He explained that he wanted to transition part of his practice toward community advocacy work, focusing on equitable development. "I know the history between us," he said, "but I also know you understand that real change isn't measured in grand gestures. It's in the choices we make every day." Marion read the letter carefully before answering. "Mentorship is earned, Mr. Langford, through consistent action. I'll meet with you monthly, starting next week. We'll see where it leads." Later, as the sun sank behind the city, Marion and Naomi stood in the rooftop garden. The raised beds were still bare from winter, but the view was luminous. Buildings washed in orange and pink, the streets below beginning to glow with streetlights. Naomi asked, "Do you ever regret not revealing your credentials at the start of the trial? It might have saved us some of the trouble." Marion rested her hands on the cane's handle and watched the last light catch on the harbor cranes. "If I had, he might have treated me differently, but he wouldn't have changed. This way, he had to see the truth about his own assumptions, and that's a harder lesson to ignore." Justice, she thought, wasn't the gavel's final rap. It was here, in the sound of children's laughter from below, in the tapping of computer keys in a classroom where knowledge was being passed without condescension, in the steady steps of someone who had learned to walk a different path. Justice isn't a single verdict. It's the work you do after the gavel falls. From the moment Marion Holt stepped onto the courthouse steps with her cane in hand and her granddaughter beside her, the day felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge. She was walking into a fight that was not just about a building, but about the idea that some histories could be erased if they stood in the way of profit. The injustice began not with a ruling or a policy, but with a glance, a tone, a dismissal from a man who thought her years and her race meant she was out of her depth. In that moment, the weight of quiet prejudice was as heavy as any legal argument. And yet Marion met it with the same calm she had carried through decades of service, knowing that patience can be sharper than anger when used well. Victor Langford believed the law was his arena, that speed and volume could substitute for truth. He underestimated Marion because he thought he could. That was his first mistake, and she let him make it again and again. She gave him the rope, and he wove it into a noose without realizing. Her granddaughter Naomi learned alongside her, watching how quiet dignity could dismantle arrogance more effectively than shouting ever could. The trial revealed more than Victor's bias. It exposed the way Hawthorne Redevelopment's practices were shaped to appear neutral while systematically targeting and devaluing Black-owned properties. It showed how policy can hide discrimination behind fine print and procedural jargon. Marion understood that fighting this wasn't only about defending Eastgate Cultural Center. It was about naming the system for what it was. She didn't let anger drive her. She let facts, preparation, and truth take center stage. When she revealed her past on the bench as a state Supreme Court justice, it was not to embarrass Victor. It was to correct the record and to remind the courtroom that justice is rooted in respect, not resume. The power of that moment came not from the gasps it provoked, but from the stillness afterward, when the jurors and the gallery understood they had been witnessing more than a property dispute. They were seeing the difference between someone who speaks about fairness and someone who lives it. Victor's fall was swift once the truth was out. His fabricated amendment crumbled under the weight of her evidence. Hawthorne's executives realized the danger of continuing their fight. The settlement they offered went far beyond saving Eastgate. It included funding for renovations, an independent audit, a community advisory board, and apprenticeship programs for minority contractors. It was systemic change forced into being by one woman's refusal to be diminished. The Bar Association's discipline was a different kind of justice. Victor's 6-month suspension and mandatory community service at Eastgate were not just punishments, they were opportunities for him to confront the humanity behind the legal abstracts he had once dismissed. And when he arrived, Marion treated him not as an enemy, but as a man who still had choices to make about who he would become. Over months, his presence at the center shifted from obligation to commitment. He began teaching legal research to teenagers, fixing broken equipment, delivering flyers. These were not grand gestures, but small daily acts of connection. In those acts, the distance between them began to close, not erased, but bridged by effort and humility. Naomi asked Marion once if she regretted not revealing her credentials sooner. Marion's answer was simple. If she had, Victor might have shown her courtesy, but he would not have changed. By letting him confront his own assumptions, she gave him the chance to see the flaw not just in his case, but in himself. That change is harder, but it lasts longer. The moral here is not about the thrill of a win or the satisfaction of humbling a rival. It is about the courage it takes to hold your ground when the system itself is tilted. It is about the wisdom to know when to speak and when to wait. And it is about the difference between law as a tool for power and law as a safeguard for dignity. Marion's fight showed that prejudice is not always loud or obvious. It often wears the clothes of procedure and policy, cloaking bias in the language of efficiency and progress. Confronting it requires more than outrage. It requires preparation so thorough that truth cannot be ignored. It requires allies willing to speak up, like Judge Rowland and Samuel Drake, who used their roles to level the field. And it requires resilience, the kind that carries you from the courthouse steps to the final gavel without losing your composure. For Victor, the greatest consequence was not his suspension, but the slow realization that his old way of working could not survive alongside what he had learned. He came to Marion for mentorship, and she agreed. Not out of sentimentality, but because mentorship is a path toward accountability. He would have to prove himself not through words, but through consistent action. Eastgate stands today not just as a building saved, but as a testament to the people who refused to let it be erased. It is a space filled with stories, with music from the cafe radio, with the sound of students typing in the computer lab Victor now helps oversee. Its restored rooftop garden looks out over a city that is still imperfect, still unequal, but perhaps a little more aware of the power of its own communities. Marion's philosophy remains: respect must never depend on credentials. It must be the starting point for every interaction. If you felt the weight of her journey, if you believe dignity must always be defended, leave a number 1 in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to hear the next story of quiet strength changing the balance of power. Because every time someone stands their ground against prejudice, every time truth overrules arrogance, another story worth telling is born. And the more we share them, the harder they are to ignore.